The Dreams of Ghosts and Indians, a novel by Preston Jacobs, available in paperback and ebook. And we are back for part 2 of our reading and analysis of The Hedge Knight. Sweetfoot had an easier gait than Old Chestnut, but Dunk was still sore and tired when he spied the inn ahead. The tall daub and timber building beside a stream. The warm yellow light spilling from its window looked so inviting that he could not pass it by. "I've 3 silvers," he told himself. "Enough for a good meal, and as much ale as I care to drink." As he dismounted, a naked boy emerged dripping from the stream and began to dry himself on a rough-spun brown cloak. "Are you the stable boy?" Dunk asked him. The lad looked to be no more than 8 or 9, a pasty-faced, skinny thing, his bare feet caked in mud up to the ankle. His hair was the queerest thing about him. He had none. "I want my palfrey rubbed down, and oats for all 3. Can you tend to them?" And so here we are with the second scene from The Hedge Knight, where Dunk makes it to an inn. Now, much of this whole scene at the inn is not as it seems, and later we get not just one, but 2 later accounts of what's really going on, first from Egg and then from Daron, both which flip the narrative on its head quite a bit. And we will get into this later. But here and now we find Dunk is now riding Sweetfoot, the better horse, instead of Chestnut, the poor quality stot. Interestingly, it seems that this is the first time that Dunk has ever ridden Sweetfoot. As he comments on the differences between Sweetfoot and Chestnut, Dunk makes no such comment on the differences when riding Thunder, so it seems Dunk has practiced on Thunder before. A couple of other things. Daub is a plaster, mud, or clay that's used in coating surfaces and acting as a mortar of sorts. It's usually used with a weaved wood called wattle, but here it's being used to fill the spaces between logs. And here Dunk thinks that he can get a good dinner and a lot of ale for 3 silvers. Now, I will say that the cost of things is not really very consistent, nice and fire. Most egregiously, the Hand's tourney prizes are off the wall, but specifically in The Hedge Knight, we hear that a suit of armor costs 800 stags, which means that the price of a good dinner is about 0.4% of the cost of armor, which isn't an unreasonable ratio. If the armor is $5,000 by today's standards, the dinner would be $20. So next Dunk runs into who he thinks is the stable boy in a stream. Now on first read, the boy being skinny and pasty-faced makes one think that the boy is sickly, and him being bald makes one think that he has lice. And him being barefoot and caked in mud adds to this idea that he's some poor kid. Of course, this is actually Egg, and he's pale because he's a Targaryen, and barefoot because he was swimming in a stream. He's probably only swimming because he was bored, because Daron is passed out drunk. And the baldness, of course, is to hide his Targaryen hair. We later find out that Daron is in fact evading his guards and is in hiding. Daron doesn't have Targaryen hair, but Egg does, so Egg needed to have his head shaved. Now, in Ice and Fire, altering one's hair to hide one's identity is a fairly common occurrence. We see this notably with Sansa and young Griff. But the case that is most relevant is Arya having her hair cut to hide the fact that she's a highborn girl, so that she can pretend to be a lowborn boy. As The Hedge Knight was written around the same time as early parts of A Clash of Kings, it seems pretty clear that our author was borrowing this idea from himself. George R. Martin was writing about Arya playing lowborn around the same time as he was writing about a similarly aged Egg also playing lowborn. And on a side note, Daenerys Targaryen, who is thematically linked to Arya, is also bald in early Clash of Kings, though she never ends up hiding her identity. Now, Egg hiding his identity with a head shave does make some fans theorize that Varys also shaves his head to hide the fact that he has Valyrian hair, and that's the reason he supports young Griff's cause, because young Griff is related to him. And even though it's quite clear that the idea of Egg's shaved head comes from Arya, I would still say that the theory is interesting and possible. However, I should mention a couple other reasons why Varys could have a shaved head. The first is that the idea of a eunuch advisor comes largely from the black eunuchs of the Ottoman court who were clean-shaven. though in this case clean-shaven is a euphemism for having the shaft of their penis cut off in addition to the testicles. The second, and more relevant to the story, is that Varys is a mummer, and people who act in plays often shave their heads so they can easily wear wigs. As Varys is often in and out of disguises, the shaved head may help him. And of course, Varys could be bald simply because he's bald, like Syrio Forel or Strong Belwas. The boy looked at him brazenly. I could, if I wanted. Dunk frowned. I'll have none of that. I'm a knight, I'll have you know. You don't look like a knight. Do all knights look the same? No, but they don't look like you either. Your sword belt's made of rope. So long as it holds my scabbard, it serves. Now see to my horses. You'll get a copper if you do well, and a clout in the ear if you don't. He did not wait to see how the stable boy took that, but turned and shouldered through the door. And so here we get what, on first read, seems like a simple exchange where Dunk wants his horses cared for and is dealing with an insolent boy. But the scene is more interesting and funny once the truth is revealed. Dunk is not actually talking to a stable boy, but instead a Targaryen prince who was simply going for a swim. So it's Dunk who is actually being rude, commanding a stranger, and a prince no less, to care for his horses. But of course, Egg doesn't reveal who he actually is. As we find out later, he wants to go to Ashford and thinks Dunk is his best shot at that. But of course, it's not just Egg who is pretending. Dunk is pretending to be a knight. It's a double lie. We have one character who's pretending to be more than he is, and one character pretending to be less. So they both can get to Ashford. Dunk's lie is rather funny, of course, as Egg is a prince. Egg is literally around knights all day long, every day of his life. So when he says Dunk doesn't look like a knight, he's kind of an expert on that. Now Dunk then offers Egg a copper if he cares for his horses well, and a clout in the ear if he doesn't. The offer of a copper being hilarious, as Egg's family is fabulously wealthy. Now, a clout in the ear, by the way, is more commonly said as a clip round the ear. This is British slang for slapping a kid in the ear back when hitting children was common. An open-handed slap to the ear is quite jarring and scary, but relatively harmless. One is avoiding the eyes, nose, and teeth where permanent damage can be done. Still, this relatively harmless hit would still be a hit, and quite ironically, Egg is a prince. The punishment for striking royalty is possibly the loss of a hand or possibly death. And this is the entire conflict of the story, as later on, Dunk strikes Arryn. Now, interestingly enough, the first time George R. R. Martin uses the term clout in the ear comes in Arya 3: A Game of Thrones, when Arya accidentally leaves the Red Keep after listening to Varys and Illyrio, ends up in the sewers, and then washes herself off in the river. She gets out, dresses, and is then misidentified as lowborn. We have a highborn child washing in a river who's then misidentified as lowborn and told they're going to get a clout in the ear. It is again quite clear that our author was taking his ideas about Arya and transferring them to Egg here. And of course, the entire highborn child spending time as a lowborn child and gaining wisdom from it trope is borrowed from Mark Twain's Prince and the Pauper. At this hour, he would have expected the inn to be crowded. But the common room was almost empty. A young lordling in a fine damask mantle was passed out on one table, snoring softly into a pool of spilled wine. Otherwise, there was no one. Dunk looked around uncertainly until a stout, short, whey-faced woman emerged from the kitchens and said, "Sit where you like. Is it ale you want or food?" "Both." Dunk took a chair by the window, well away from the sleeping man. "There's good lamb, roasted with a crust of herb, and some ducks my son shot down. Which will you have?" He had not eaten at an inn in half a year or more. "Both." The woman laughed. "Well, you're big enough for it." She drew a tankard of ale and brought it to his table. "Will you be wanting a room for the night as well?" And so here Dunk heads into the inn, which is empty because everyone's gone to Ashford, and finds a man passed out drunk. And while this seems to be a simple background setting at first, it turns out there's quite a bit to read here. The drunk man is really Daeron, a Targaryen prince. We are clued into the fact that he's rich because he's wearing a damask mantle. Damask is silk with patterns woven into it, and a mantle is kind of like a cloak. Now, George R. R. Martin uses the word mantle quite a bit, but it should be noted that in the Bible, mantles were worn by prophets. Of course, we find out later that Daeron is on the run from his own guards because he doesn't want to go to Ashford, and the reason he doesn't want to go is because he's haunted by prophetic dreams. Daeron has dreamed a great dragon dying and fears the dragon is himself. Now, you may have heard the phrase, to take up the mantle. This is from the Bible, 2 Kings, and it means to take on the responsibilities of, or to take on the role of. So Daeron is sitting here in a mantle, not wanting to take up the mantle of his own prophetic vision. And of course, these dreams are likely why Daeron has gotten himself drunk. Of course, because Daeron has no interest in going to Ashford, we have motivation for Egg's plan to join Dunk. He does want to go to Ashford, and Daeron's drunkenness gives him all the opportunity. Now, a Targaryen like Daeron, lacking Targaryen hair, is the first Targaryen of the sort that we meet in Ice and Fire, if you don't count the possibility of Jon Snow being a Targaryen. The genetics of hair color is of course a huge aspect of A Game of Thrones, and here we are on the topic again. Why our author has chosen to introduce non-metallic hair-colored Targaryens here is an open but likely important question. Daeron is part Dane and part Martell, and has come out with sandy brown hair. And we will meet characters like Baelor and Valar in the story as well, people without the traditional hair. Now, we should remember that at the time of writing this, our author had recently written about a silver-haired Daenerys hatching dragons, and here we have a cast of characters with non-Targaryen hair running around at a time when dragons are dead. The implication, whether true or a misdirect, is that there's some sort of correlation, that those with Targaryen-like hair or Targaryen-like genetics are more likely to hatch dragons than those without. The statement being made, again, whether true or a misdirect, is that the genetics of Targaryens has led to the dragons to die and to return. No. Dunk would have liked nothing better than a soft straw mattress and a roof above his head, but he needed to be careful with his coin. The ground would serve. Some food, some ale, and it's on to Ashford for me. How much farther is it? A day's ride. Bear north when the road forks at the burned mill. Is my boy seeing to your horses, or has he run off again? Nah, he's there, said Dunk. You seem to have no custom. Half the town's gone to see the tourney. My own would as well, if I allowed it. They'll have this in when I go, but the boy would sooner swagger around with soldiers, and the girl turns to sighs and giggles every time a knight rides by. I swear I couldn't tell you why. Knights are built the same as other men, and I never knew a joust to change the price of eggs. She eyed Dunk curiously. His sword and shield told her one thing, his rope belt and rough-spun tunic quite another. You bound for the tourney yourself? He took a sip of the ale before he answered. A nut-brown color it was, and thick on the tongue, the way he liked it. Aye, he said, I mean to be a champion. Do you now? The innkeep answered, polite enough. And so next we find out that Dunk has learned to be somewhat responsible with money, choosing not to blow Sir Arlen's cash on a room. Sir Arlen seems to have instilled some good lessons in Dunk to help him survive in the world. So a few small things. We learn there's a burned mill close by. This is not to be confused with Burning Mill or any other mill in Ice and Fire. Mills in general were big fire hazards, as it's a place where grain is being grinded, and with flour dust in the air and stones that can spark, explosions were actually quite common. Not to mention there was just a drought. Dunk also comments that the inn has no custom. This is the same as saying that it has no business, custom as in customers. And we see that Dunk sips his ale before answering about going to Ashford. This is of course to buy himself time to think about his answer, and he opts to reply with great confidence. As with Egg, Dunk seems to be testing out his lie. So the most interesting part of this section is that there is confusion over who the boy is. When the innkeep talks about her boy, Dunk assumes that she's talking about Egg, but it's rather clear that the innkeep's boy, who unlike Egg is old enough to swagger about with soldiers, has in fact run off. Running off seems to be a common enough thing for the innkeep's boy, and the innkeep's girl has likely gone with him. It's pretty clear they've gone to Ashford. Of course, Dunk's confusion becomes the reader's confusion, which helps hide Egg's true identity. The innkeep claims a boy, Dunk sees a boy. There's no mystery. and no room for a Targaryen prince. Across the room, the lordling raised his head from the wine puddle. His face had a sallow, unhealthy cast to it, beneath a rat's nest of sandy brown hair, and blonde stubble crusted to his chin. He rubbed his mouth, blinked at Dunk, and said, "I dreamed of you." His hand trembled as he pointed a finger. "You stay away from me, do you hear? You stay well away." Dunk stared at him uncertainly. "My lord?" The innkeep leaned close. "Never you mind that one, sir. All he does is drink and talk about his dreams. I'll see about that food." She bustled off. "Food?" The lordling made the word an obscenity. He staggered to his feet, one hand on the table to keep himself from falling. "I'm going to be sick," he announced. The front of his tunic was crusty red, with old wine stains. "I wanted a whore, but there's none to be found here. All gone to Ashford. Gods be good, I need some wine." He lurched unsteadily from the common room, and Dunk heard him climbing steps, singing under his breath. A sad creature, thought Dunk. But why did he think he knew me? He pondered that a moment over his ale. So next Daron wakes up and is quite disturbed by the presence of Dunk, claiming that he knows him before complaining about a lack of sex workers and heading upstairs. And well, in truth, this scene is more than a bit clumsy. So later we find out that Daron has been spooked by a prophetic dream of Dunk with a dead dragon. He's so frightened by it that he evades his guards and doesn't want to go to Ashford for fear that the dragon is him. Then he chooses to get drunk because of his scary dreams. And so, waking up and seeing Dunk, the man of his vision, who may kill him, would be very, very disturbing indeed. The first part of this dialogue is completely appropriate. But then Daron just changes all at once. The danger of Dunk vanishes, and he complains about a lack of sex workers and wine. He just stumbles upstairs. Within a matter of seconds, he goes from trembling to singing to himself. Realistically, after waking up to the sight of his potential killer, he really should be running from the scene. Now, perhaps one can try to chalk this up to drunkenness or Targaryen insanity, but I can't really see a drunk person or even an insane person acting like this. Fear of dying doesn't just magically disappear in either case. A panicked creature doesn't instantly calm. In fact, biology makes it so this can't happen by pumping adrenaline into one's system when one's fearful. This is literally why people tremble. It's a small thing, but this exchange has always bothered me. Anyway, Daron having prophetic dreams is interesting, as this is the first time in Ice and Fire that it is suggested that Targaryens, as a family, get prophetic dreams. That is, in some sort of genetic, hereditary sense, they are prone to receiving them. Later in A Feast for Crows, Aemon even brings up Daron and their family's susceptibility to dreams. And here he is, after Dany, the second Targaryen dreamer that we've ever met. And this is notable as, in A Game of Thrones, many of the characters receive prophetic dreams. Ned, Tyrion, Bran, Sansa, Arya, Jon, they all get them, so Dany's dreams are never really singled out as hereditary. And with the case of Bran, he is very clearly receiving dreams from the Three-Eyed Crow. And so now the story has introduced two possibilities on where dreams come from. They either are received from another actor, or they just happen for hereditary reasons. Now the introduction of this second possible source may simply be a misdirect, as we should remember that around the same time as The Hedge Knight is written, George R. R. Martin was writing A Clash of Kings, a story that very early on introduces the character of Quaithe, who is later revealed to be a dream sender, and a story that introduces the glass candle, a dream-sending device. In fact, glass candles were originally supposed to be a much bigger part of A Clash of Kings, being introduced in the prologue, with every maester owning one. But our author scaled that importance back. So this is really fascinating. At the same time as writing a story establishing a hereditary cause for dreams, he's also expanding the role of dream-sending characters and dream-sending devices. Now, if there is a dream sender in The Hedge Knight, it's never revealed. Remember, Bloodraven is not yet a character, and supposedly the glass candles are dark during this period of time. That said, the puppeteering themes of this story certainly imply a puppet master. But we aren't absolutely sure if there is one, or if there is, if our author has decided who it would be. The lamb was as good as any he'd ever eaten, and the duck was even better, cooked with cherries and lemons and not near as greasy as most. The innkeep brought buttered peas as well, and oaten bread still hot from her oven. This is what it means to be a knight, he told himself as he sucked the last bit of meat off the bone. Good food and ale whenever I want it, and no one to clout me in the head. He had a second tankard of ale with the meal, a third to wash it down, and a fourth because there was no one to tell him he couldn't. And when he was done, he paid the woman with a silver stag and got back a fistful of coppers. It was full dark by the time Dunk emerged. His stomach was full and his purse was a little lighter, but he felt good as he walked to the stables. Ahead, he heard a horse whicker. "Easy, lad," a boy's voice said. Dunk quickened his step, frowning. He found the stable boy mounted on Thunder and wearing the old man's armor. The hauberk was longer than he was, and he'd had to tilt the helm back on his bald head or else it would have covered his eyes. He looked utterly intent and utterly absurd. Dunk stopped in the stable door and laughed. And so next we have a classic George R. R. Martin food description scene with Dunk enjoying his meal and thinking about how great it is that he is a knight all on his own. And it's rather clear that the ghost of Sir Arlen is hanging over Dunk here. Keep in mind, Dunk was with Sir Arlen for most of his life, and the man is the closest thing to a father he had. And the man just died. So when Dunk thinks about how great it is that there's no one there to clout him in the head, he is specifically saying how great it is that his father, more or less, is not around. He is definitely protesting too much, and it's doubtful he's actually having that great of a time, and that this is the best lamb he's ever eaten. A striking line in this section is the one about drinking. Dunk is trying to watch his coin, but he has a second tankard, then a third, and a fourth because there's no one there to tell him he couldn't. Dunk is specifically drinking heavily because Sir Arlen isn't there. Although he's pretending not to, Dunk is mourning. This is then followed up with Dunk heading to the stables to find Egg atop Thunder. We hear here that the horse whickers. A whicker is a heavy breathing that horses do when they get excited. Egg is dressed in Sir Arlen's armor, and Dunk finds the whole scene ridiculous. Of course, it's rather ironic that Dunk finds Egg playing dress-up as a knight funny. Dunk himself is playing dress-up and pretending to be a knight. Egg may look ridiculous, but Dunk also looks ridiculous as he's poorly equipped. And Egg's ambition is clearly supposed to mirror Dunk's, with Dunk now slipping into the role of Sir Arlen, the man he's mourning. And at least in Dunk's head, Egg slipping into the role of young Dunk. This transition is certainly not subtle, with Dunk specifically thinking about Egg as a stand-in for his own younger self several times through the story. The younger generation becomes the older generation, and the circle of life continues. And this is certainly why the story begins on a sunset and ends on a sunrise. The boy looked up, flushed, vaulted to the ground. "My lord, I didn't mean—" "Thief," Dunk said, trying to sound stern. "Take off that armor, and be glad that Thunder didn't kick you in that fool head. He's a warhorse, not a boy's pony." The boy took off the helm and flung it to the straw. "I could ride him as well as you," he said, bold as you please. "Close your mouth. I want none of your insolence. The hauberk too. Take it off." "What did you think you were doing?" "How can I tell you with my mouth closed?" The boy squirmed out of the chainmail and let it fall. "You can open your mouth to answer," said Dunk. "Now pick up that mail, shake off the dirt, and put it back where you found it. And the half-helm too. Did you feed the horses as I told you? And rub down Sweetfoot?" "Yes," the boy said as he shook straw from the mail. "You're going to Ashford, aren't you?" "Take me with you, sir." And so next Dunk tells Egg to get off his horse, and we get a little comedy as Dunk tells Egg to be quiet, but also wants answers. A child pointing out contradictions in commands to be sassy is pretty common. Now it is interesting that Egg claims that he can ride Thunder as well as Dunk. This is untrue, but his arrogance is perhaps understandable. Princes are trained in horseback riding, and Egg may assume that Dunk is less trained than he is, based on his appearance. It should be noted that Egg has committed to the lie that he is the stable boy now by feeding and tending to the horses, and he outright says what his motivation is. He wants to go to Ashford. The innkeep had warned him of this. "And what might your mother say to that?" "My mother?" The boy wrinkled up his face. "My mother is dead. She wouldn't say anything." He was surprised. Wasn't the innkeep his mother? Perhaps he only prenticed to her. Dunk's head was a little fuzzy from the ale. "Are you an orphan boy?" he asked uncertainly. "Are you?" the boy threw back. "I was once," Dunk admitted. "Till the old man took me in." "If you took me, I could squire for you." "I have no need for a squire," he said. "Every knight needs a squire," the boy said. "You look as though you need one more than most." And so next we get the first hint that Egg is not as he seems. We find out that the innkeep is not Egg's mother, and in fact, Egg's mother is dead. Egg's mom, by the way, was Deanna Dane, which is revealed on a family tree from the World of Ice and Fire a good 16 years after this story is written. We have no idea how she died. Dunk then incorrectly assumes that Egg is an apprentice. Had he paid attention, he would have remembered that the innkeep had called her boy and girl her heirs. You generally don't bequeath everything to an apprentice. Dunk then makes the connection, rather incorrectly, that Egg is like him. He thinks Egg is an orphan, and we are again reminded of Ser Arlen's kindness when he took in and cared for Dunk. Something that Dunk is actually refusing to do with Egg, a boy who actually doesn't need it. Now we do get another hint that Egg knows that Dunk is not a knight. Egg suggests that he squire for Dunk. Every knight needs a squire, and Dunk looks like he needs one more than most. Earlier, Egg straight up said that Dunk doesn't look like a knight, and the implication here is that the presence of a squire would make Dunk look the part a bit better. Dunk raised a hand threateningly. "And you look as though you need a clout in the ear, it seems to me. Fill me a sack of oats. I'm off for Ashford. Alone." If the boy was frightened, he hid it well. For a moment he stood there defiant, his arms crossed. But just as Dunk was about to give up on him, the lad turned and went for the oats. Dunk was relieved. A pity I couldn't. But he has a good life here at the inn. A better one than he'd have squiring for a hedge knight. Taking him would be no kindness. He could still feel the lad's disappointment, though. As he mounted Sweetfoot and took up Thunder's lead, Dunk decided that a copper penny might cheer him up. "Here, lad, for your help." He flipped the coin down at him with a smile. But the stable boy made no attempt to catch it. It fell in the dirt between his bare feet, and there he let it lie. "He'll scoop it up as soon as I'm gone," Dunk told himself. He turned the palfrey and rode from the inn, leading the other two horses. The trees were bright with moonlight, and the sky was cloudless and speckled with stars. Yet as he headed down the road, he could feel the stable boy watching his back, sullen and silent. And so here Dunk refuses to take on Egg as a squire and once again threatens him with a clout in the ear. He is notably relieved when Egg actually does what he says. It's clear he didn't want to hit him. And Egg doesn't appear to be scared by the threat. I imagine this is because Egg has dealt with the fury of his brother Arion, and Dunk's threat to clout him in the ear is really nothing compared to what Arion has done. Later in the story, we find out that Arion would commonly pull out a knife and threaten to castrate Egg, and Arion killed Egg's cat. There's some obvious parallels between Arion Brightflame and Viserys, with both having a temper and speaking random wisdom about the dragon, and thus we're supposed to think that Egg's experience with his brother is similar to Daenerys's. Although beatings are never specifically mentioned, they certainly seem likely. Now it's clear that Dunk is experiencing an unusual amount of guilt for not taking the boy with him. This of course is all imagined. Egg is a prince. But even beyond that, there's little reason to feel too sad about not taking on a stable boy who has a roof over his head when there are so many other needy people in this world. Dunk even says as much. However, we of course must remember that Ser Arlen just died, and Dunk is reliving a situation of his own life. Ser Arlen took him on, saved him, acted as his father, and now Ser Arlen is dead. Those feelings are certainly with Dunk right now. And we end the chapter with Egg not picking up the copper that Dunk gave him. This is again funny as Egg is fabulously wealthy, he certainly doesn't need a copper, and Dunk is misreading the situation completely. Dunk thinks Egg is sad because he wants a better life with Dunk, and in truth, he just wants to go to Ashford. Again, Dunk's guilt here is most likely about his relationship with Ser Arlen, and not specifically Egg. And this is a good place to stop. We'll see you in part 3.